Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you all for coming out today. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you and to talk a little bit about the controller's office and the controller's race. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ellen Spiegel. I'm running for state controller. I've got 40 years of business experience, and I've run my own business for the last 25 years. I have a very eclectic business background. I started out with a degree in consumer economics from Cornell University, and as several people in this room have heard me say through the years, my background is very eclectic, so you never know what's going to come out of my mouth. And I started out in financial services. I began my career licensed to sell mutual funds and life insurance. I spent 5 years on and off at American Express. I then I spent time at Lloyd's Bank. I was the New York branch budget analyst and worked in the accounting department there. I then went into online services. I worked for a company called Prodigy that some of you may or may not remember. At the time, it was a joint venture of IBM and Sears. It was the first online service with graphics. I started in product development there, working on some of the first online banks, online supermarkets, and online e-commerce applications. As product manager, I created the very first store anywhere where you could buy computer software online, pay for it with a credit card, and download it to your computer. After being there for 4 years, I moved to Atlanta to work for the Weather Channel. I was the manager of the New Business Enterprises unit and had P&L responsibility for everything other than what was done through on-camera meteorology. So like I ran the USA Today weather page, that was a joint venture. I launched the Weather Channel home video collection as a branded product. I ran 1-900 weather. I don't know if anybody remembers 900 numbers. I used to say it was really hot. And then my big claim to fame there was I was the product manager who brought the Weather Channel online. I was one of the mothers of weather.com. And while I was doing that, I became the founding chair of the Internet Industry's Public Policy Committee. So I helped develop all of the privacy guidelines, marketing guidelines, email marketing guidelines, children's guidelines, everything that the industry worked on, I worked on in the mid-90s. I then moved to California. I ran the online division for an ad agency. And then I started doing work with .com startups. I worked at an incubator in Pasadena called Idea Lab. I was vice president of sales and marketing for the very first venture that they had that did not get funding. And my pay kept getting cut, and I said to my boss one day, I would keep dipping into my savings because you can't afford to pay me, and I'm not really doing that much. And I realized that this business and I are both going to run out of money in the same week. So I said, how about you give me a leave of absence, and I'll go do some consulting work, and when you have funding and are ready to have me back, just say the word and I'll be here. And he said, okay. And that was 25 years ago, and I've run my own business ever since. I live in Henderson with my husband. We got married in 1999, wanted to buy a house. We were living in LA, couldn't afford to buy a house. And that happens to a lot of people. And we decided we'd start looking for vacation homes. And we were looking everywhere, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And one day we were driving into Las Vegas just for some R&R, and I saw a billboard that was putting up a new community, and I said, we have friends here, we have family here, and there's no state income tax. And my husband said, yeah, I've heard that. And he said, well, no. I said, you don't understand. If we can find a house where the mortgage payment is less than or equal to what we're paying for state income taxes in California, it's like the state of Nevada will give us a house for free, and the only catch is that we have to live in it. And so we found a 2,000 square foot house on a quarter of an acre zone for some of the best schools in the state. And that was how we got to Nevada, and especially being consultant, it just kind of worked. My practice is mostly in risk management. We are focused on workers' comp claim services. So like I said, my background is really across the board. We do training programs, do coaching, do all sorts of things that are related to that. I was raised in a family where I was not allowed to whine about things. The big thing that my parents always said is if I was going to complain about something, I had to have a solution. And if I could say what my solution was, I had to be prepared to act on it. And that's really something that's guided my whole life and my whole career. So just as an example, I'm 12 years old. My older brother has a newspaper, and I wanted to be a news girl. Except back then, companies were allowed to discriminate on the basis of gender. The newspaper didn't have news girls, there was news boy. And I was complaining about it. So my mom said, in typical mom fashion, what are you gonna do about it? Now I'm 12 years old. So you know what I did? I subcontracted my brother's best friend's newspaper route from him and took over the route. The newspaper knew this, but since David's name was still on the route, they were okay with it. And then the law changed. And I went into the newspaper office the following Saturday and said, okay, put it in my name. And that's how I became one of the first news girls in the country, because I was already doing the job. But that's the approach I take. So I was complaining about a lot of things when I, way back when, and my husband said, okay, so what are you gonna do about it? So I decided to run for office, and I ran for assembly. And people said to me, I was living in a Republican area, and people said, you can't win there. I'm a Democrat, for those of you who don't know that. They said, the Democrat has not won this seat for 20 years, and no Democratic woman has ever won this seat. I said, you know what? If you believe that I can't win this, you don't know me. And I went out and I started knocking on doors. And I'm very, very frugal with campaign dollars and just doing everything really just as me. And I won that seat. I was not able to hold the seat though. Then I helped work on redistricting in 2011, and I took it up as a women's issue because women a lot of times get drawn out of their seats. And I said it, what time I was first elected, the legislature was 28% women. And I said, until it's 50-50, we can't afford to lose women's seats. So I lobbied lots of people all over the state and spoke to women's groups and everybody, and said, we can't write women out of seats. I said, save the Republicans, save the Democrats, not a partisan issue, it happens to everybody. And I actually lobbied the Supreme Court justices, and as a result of all of that effort, no women got drawn out of their seats. But they also, when the special masters put the maps together, my house was put in a really, 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 really Republican area that I really couldn't win. So it was my anniversary weekend. I looked at the maps. I called out to my husband. I said, honey, I know what I want for anniversary. He said, what's that? I said, I want a house over there. And he said, okay. So we moved, and I ran again, and I won, and I wound up serving 5 terms in the Assembly. I was chair, my final term, I was chair of the Assembly Commerce and Labor Committee. I had various leadership positions throughout my years in the legislature. I was vice chair of the Taxation Committee. I was vice chair of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Education Funding and Capital Improvement Programs. And as I have looked at this and looked at being controller, there are a lot of things that we can be doing, that the controller's office can be doing, and the controller can be doing from a CFO position, and looking at how we can be using the state's assets to move the state forward. And one of the things that I keep saying is, because of the experience I had in the legislature and because of my business experience, I know where the money comes from, I know where the money goes to, and I have ideas on what we can be doing to better utilize the state's assets to move the state forward and make the state better. So one example that I'll give you is a program that I kind of conceived that I call the Right Track Program. And during the recession a decade ago and during the pandemic, a lot of my constituents lost their jobs or had their hours cut back. And I'd be talking to people and I'd say to people, if you can't find a job, or if you can't have enough hours to make a go of it, you might need to think about starting your own business. Well, in 2010, I actually put together 2 entrepreneur fairs for my constituents. I live in Henderson, worked with the Henderson Chamber, worked with the city, worked with SCORE, worked with everybody that I could pull into one room, I pulled into one room. And we got resources for people. This was before the state was doing very much to help small businesses and help startups. Times have changed and we're doing more now, but it's still kind of pricey and it still takes a lot of money to get started. There's a fellow who lives in my cul-de-sac who still hasn't gotten his heater situation resolved from the lockdown. And I was talking to him about starting a business, and he was like, even coming up with the $200 for the license fee is just something that I'm not sure about. And I thought about it and I thought, you know what? Let's get people started on the right track. Let's not have people start businesses just kind of in their garage unofficially and not get licensed. Let's give them a reason to get licensed and let's get them help. So what this would do is let people have a provisional business license for free for 6 months, provided they agree to get mentored. And then we get them some mentoring and get them help, so they'll have business plans, they'll have strategic planning, they'll have help so that they have a better chance of being a success. Now, why would this fit into the controller's office? Why, like, how do you even make that connection? It's because if you look at the state's overall balance sheet, you say, okay, so we're gonna spend a little money over here, we're gonna bypass some revenue, and we're gonna spend some money on mentoring. But you know what, over here, once these folks are working, we're not gonna be paying unemployment. We're not gonna be paying them Medicaid. They're not gonna need food assistance. They're not gonna need other social services. So overall, the state is going to come out ahead. And that's the kind of approach I wanna take. Something else that's really important to me is collecting money that's owed to the state. Every controller that I've seen, for as long as I've been in Nevada, which is like 20 some odd years, has tried to deal with collections. And every single one of them has failed. And it's because there have been inherent problems in how the law was structured, and there weren't any teeth in the law, and there was no way to enforce it. So you had the controllers going out, and I don't blame a single one of them from either party, not a single one, but they were going out to folks and saying, pretty please pass. And you know what, pretty please just doesn't cut it these days. It does for a lot of people, but there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are owed to the state. So during the last legislative session, even though I wasn't in the legislature, I reached out to the controller's office, and I worked with the controller's office on some legislation that got put into law. So now the controller has the ability to work with the Secretary of State and get a business license renewal denied to an entity that owes money to the state. And I know how to do write-off analysis and look for, you know, where do we go first? How do we do this? And I want to get that money and bring it in. Obviously, the fees would go to the agencies. In my vision, and I don't know if I could get this through, but the fines and penalties that are associated with that would go into a bucket for special projects that would then be allocated out based on priorities and based on what the legislature deems is appropriate. But there are certain things you don't ever want to budget against fees and fines. Well, fees, yes, fines, no. Fines and penalties, you don't. Because it's bad policy. You don't want to be saying, okay, I want to be budgeting and assuming that people are doing the wrong thing. We want to get people doing the right thing and then have money the right way. So I don't know if I'm at my 15 minutes yet. You have about 2 minutes left. Awesome. So those are the kinds of things I want to do. Those are the kinds of approaches I want to take. For those of you who don't know me, I work with everybody. I'm known for having big stakeholder meetings. I have pulled lots and lots of people into a room together to talk about issues. And I'm always looking to find what's right for Nevada. And by what's right for Nevada, it's what's right for all of Nevada. It's not Northern Nevada, it's not Southern Nevada, it's not rural Nevada, it's all of Nevada. I don't care what party you're in. I don't care where in the state you live. We have to be coming up with things that are going to work across the board and really taking a holistic view of the state and moving the state forward. So I think I'm there.
All right. I have a question.
Yes.
And we'll time the period for questions. How does, if you were controller, how do you work in concert with the state treasurer?
Well, the controller is the state CFO, the chief fiscal officer, and is responsible for the big picture. I like to think of it as the operations, and the treasurer is the chief investment officer. So they take the money that we have and manage it to make it work better. The current treasurer I know has worked really hard and has gotten us the best bond rating we've had in years. And he and I actually work well together. We both went to Cornell, so we speak the same language. Right? Oh, right, you did too, I forgot. And we learned the same kind of approach to business solving. Zach and I were both on an alumni board together, like a decade ago. So I think that we'll have a good working relationship.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for coming and speaking to us.
I haven't heard that for a long time.
It's the last position that I know you from, an elected spot, so that's what I'm going to call you until you become a controller. So if you had one magic BDR that you could move to the 2023 legislative session, what would it be?
It would be my right track program, because I think that it will help a huge number of Nevadans. and it will get people on the right path of fiscal stability. And I think that it's also setting up a paradigm for success and a new way of thinking, where it's not just that the government is saying, here's what you're going to do. It's where we're helping and we're facilitating to make it better. So that's kind of my magic wand.
It's interesting that 98% of businesses in Nevada are small businesses. So I think that's also a compelling reason to help people become entrepreneurs and start. I mean, they're providing all the goods and services we all use. So I appreciate that idea.
Thank you.
Questions?
Someone's got to have a question.
I mean,
Okay, come on.
I'm curious how you feel your experience in the legislature has prepared you. Which aspects of that has prepared you most for being an executive level position in a constitutional officer in our state?
That's a great question, and it's helped in a number of ways. So one of the things that it's done is it's given me an understanding of how the state works in a way that I just wouldn't have had I not been in the legislature, and especially had I not been in the legislature for as long as I was in the legislature. So that's one way. Another thing is that it has helped me learn, the controller still does get a BDR, and I've learned how to get legislation passed. And I've got a good track record of getting legislation passed. So it's helpful there. But the other thing that's really kind of an interesting thing that nobody thinks about is that as I'm coming out and meeting with people, I'm meeting with different groups, I keep getting asked all kinds of questions that have to do with legislative history. And there are just a number of different ways that having that legislative history and having that legislative experience will really mean something. So let me give you an example. I was on the transportation committee for 4 of my terms. I was vice chair at the last term that I was on transportation. And I was also part of the Southern Nevada Forum, which is an interim group, and I was co-chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. The controller's on the NDOT board. So now I have a whole lot of experience and understanding of transportation issues in a way that had I not been in the legislature, I never would have had that experience. And it really comes into play. And it comes into also knowing the state's history and understanding some of the obstacles that we've had and how we've gotten past them. Because things will come back again.
If we were to get a different governor, a different party, do you think that would in any way impact your job as controller?
So I think that having come out of corporate America, I understand that at times you can have leadership changes, and part of everything is adapting to the people that you work with. I work with everybody. And I think that to be successful, anybody who's in the executive branch has to be prepared to work with whomever else is elected.
We've been hearing a lot of questions about, the consequences if we elect the wrong candidate to Secretary of State, because that leads into elections. Like, what would be the most consequential aspect if Nevada is elected, maybe like the quote unquote wrong candidate for controller?
So let me go back to the job function of controller. So, because most people don't know what the controller does, and a lot of people glaze over, and I've spent years trying to figure, well, not years, but at least a year, figuring out how to communicate this well. So here's what the controller does. Pays the bills, makes sure the state gets paid what it's owed, lets everybody know where we stand, and then also sits on the NDOT board and is part of the executive branch audit committee. So the thing is that the controller's office is integral to running the state. And they control the vendor database, for example. And imagine what would happen if the systems got messed up and vendors didn't get paid. And then people just said, well, I'm not gonna work with the state anymore because the state owes me money, or it's too hard to get paid, or it's too hard to work with. It's looking at the big picture, but it's also looking at who's got a skill set to move the state forward. I know that they've been trying to put in a new accounting system for a number of years, and I've heard that it's been a challenge. And that the current vendor that they're working with isn't really going well. I've got experience with big tech implementation. I've got all kinds of experience where I've taken things that have been very complex, distilled it down to make it into bite-sized, manageable chunks, for lack of a better term, and then worked with it that way. And I've got that kind of experience to do it and to get things done the way that they need to get done.
Very quickly, does procurement for the state fall under the controller's office?
The vendor database does, and I'm not entirely sure. I think it's been bifurcated, and some of it's through the purchasing department, and there are some aspects that are through the controller's office, and it's not going to be until I'm in there that I'm going to be able to tell the difference. Jeanette, you had a question.
Yeah, and you kind of nibbled around it on a lot of things. So I think one of the things that's underestimated in terms of what you've done is that, in fact, you've been a lobbyist because you've lobbied for your own bills, right?
Right.
And so I noted on here all the different endorsements that you have. And these are some pretty disparate groups, politically and interest-wise and so forth. And so my experience with you has truly been that you work with everyone, and that those groups, when you work with them, they would start in your office, and then they would move to your outer office, and then they would move to a bigger room in the legislative building, because you kept gathering people as you went along. And I think that really is, speaks to the experience that you do bring, honestly. So
Thank you.
I know that that's not really a question, but I thought it was important to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Are you getting a good reception in rural Nevada?
So I haven't spent as much time in rural Nevada as I would like. I've spent some time in rural Nevada, and it's been mixed. But a lot of what I do and I try to do is do things by Zoom. I run my campaigns very frugally, and controller is a very hard race to raise money for. Because a lot of people are kind of even like, they say like, well, we don't care about the controller. And I hear that, and you know, and so what I've been doing, especially because of COVID and because travel has gotten so expensive, is I've done a lot of outreach, and I've put together Zoom events. For a while I was doing them every week. I called them Evenings with Ellen. and I was inviting a lot of people, sending things out by text message, and I would get some people coming out, and it's really been mixed. So I've been coming up about once a month and trying to get out to rural Nevada as I can, and then supplementing with Zoom events. So even like last week, I did one event in Fernley, and I did another event in Minden just by Zoom. So even though I can't physically get here, I can be in Henderson and still be accessible to everybody.
You know, Ellen, it just strikes me as you say that, sorry if there was anybody else with their hand raised, but you know, when you think about somebody handling the state's money, I really don't see that as political at all, right? That's a dollars and cents issue, which is really, that should be partisan neutral, honestly. And I think that's just my personal feeling.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing about a D or an R that makes somebody qualified or not qualified for that job.
Experience, really. Thank you.
Thanks.
And this is just a general question. So you're required to be an attorney to be run for the AG, but are you required to be CPA or some sort of controller?
No, and there are 3 candidates in this race, and none of us are CPAs. But I do have executive business experience and 40 years business experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Follow-up question for the lady in front of me here. Why should the controller's office have any parties really involved, whether it's Democrat, Republican, that type of thing? If indeed, as you describe it, hey, these bills need to be paid, you know, the vendor database needs to take care of. It seems to me we cross any party line, I'm surprised that there are different party, it's even brought into the mix as to whether or not you are on one side of the spectrum or not. I'm sort of confused there.
Well, all I can say is that's how the Constitution was set up. So, way back when. So, I was like 100 years before I was born. But I will say that there are very few states that have elected controllers, and even fewer still that have it on a partisan basis.
You just answered my question.
And just from a historical perspective, almost every legislative session when Bob Seale was treasurer, I think when Kate Marshall was treasurer, the bill always comes forward that the controller's office should be an appointed position and not an elected position. But it is a constitutional change, so it takes two legislative sessions and a vote of the people to make that happen, and it just hasn't really ever gotten legs as a number one priority from a legislative or no one's going to run out and gather signatures to make the controller an appointed position. So it would have to be a legislative effort, and we just haven't seen it really move itself forward through a legislative session.
The implication is it will not happen in our lifetime.
Correct. 10 years old. And I think the next group is going to tell us how we can get away with that partisan issue.
That is a great segue, yeah.
Well, and even though this might not be a real political office, you can put forth bills to the legislature. So do you think that might be part of it?
It could be, but I couldn't tell you, honestly, I couldn't tell you about the origin of it. So, sorry. One thing I will tell you is that anybody who knows me knows that if I don't know an answer, I say I don't know. So I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it and make something up. Unless you say that that's what you want, and then I can make something.
But you do have the opportunity to bring forward bill draft requests. I think your office is
Yes.
allocated just one, right?
I think it's just
Each
one.
legislative session, but then you can also have the chairs of committees, legislators and stuff bring forward initiatives.
Correct,
So
correct.
she can move legislation through. She has one opportunity on her own through a bill draft request. And as a common face within the legislative process is certain bills that affect the office are promulgated.
Right, and I'm also not shy, and I will speak up when there are things that warrant someone to speak up.
All right, we have 30 seconds left if anyone has a quick one.
Well, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity and for the wonderful questions and for being so welcoming and so gracious, and thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.